What if the phone in your pocket was running a slower chip than the identical model sold one country over? Same name, same price, different silicon? For over a decade, that was Samsung's reality. 17 processors, 6 eras, a story that goes from sharing DNA with the iPhone to a 50,000 signature consumer revolt, to betting the entire brand on technology nobody has fully mastered yet. One chip humiliated Qualcomm at its lowest point. One lied about how many cores it had, and one was so catastrophically bad that Samsung's own phone division stopped trusting Samsung's chip division entirely. Every Exynos Flagship explained. It starts in 2010, and it starts with a secret. Exynos 3 single. Hummingbird in 2010, Samsung launched the original Galaxy S inside it, a chip called the Hummingbird, later rebranded as the Exynos 3 single. Built on a 45-nanometer process with a single ARM Cortex, a 8-core at 1.0 GHz. It was Samsung's first genuine flagship silicon. And against Qualcomm's Snapdragon S1, built on a wider 65-nanometer node, it was better in almost every category: faster multimedia, smoother graphics, twice the L2 cache. Its PowerVer SGX 540 GPU delivered triangle throughput no Android rival could match. But here's where the story gets interesting. The company that would spend the next decade in bitter legal warfare with Apple built its first great chip with Apple's help. Before Apple acquired a firm called Intrinsity, Samsung had already partnered with them to push the Cortex, a 8 to 1.0 GHz, a speed competitors couldn't reach. That same optimized core ended up inside the Apple A4, the chip powering the iPhone 4. Two companies who would become fierce rivals. One shared silicon ancestor. The Hummingbird wasn't just a good chip. It was proof Samsung could build silicon that met the world's highest standards. Exynos 4210 dual by 2011. One core wasn't enough. The Exynos 4210 delivered 2 ARM Cortex, a 9 cores on 45 nanometers, refined later to 32 nanometers as the 4212. It also marked Samsung's first shift to Melee graphics, replacing PowerVar with the Melee 400 MP4. Against Qualcomm's Snapdragon S3, the advantage was real. The Cortex A9's out-of-order execution pipeline gave the Galaxy S2 genuine smoothness, not from clock speed, but from processing instructions more efficiently. GPU fill rate, 1000 megapixels per second versus the Snapdragon's 800. The S2 became the best-selling Android phone of its year. But your phone wasn't just fast. It was counting down. A hardware bug buried in the eMMC controller meant that after roughly 150 to 200 days of normal use, flash memory would begin corrupting, silently, irreversibly, until the device stopped working entirely. Users called it sudden death syndrome. Samsung quietly released a firmware patch that limited high-speed write cycles to prevent the trigger. The chip wasn't recalled. The patch worked, but the pattern was forming. A great chip, hiding something dangerous underneath. Exynos 4 Quad, 4412 4 cores. And Samsung's biggest phone yet, the Galaxy S3. The chip powering it was the Exynos 4 Quad, built on 32-nanometer HKMG, high-K metal gate insulation reducing transistor leakage at smaller sizes. 4. Cortex A9 cores. Mali 400 MP4 at 440 MHz. A 20% multi-threaded performance lead over Qualcomm's Crate S4 Pro in web rendering and video transcoding. The Galaxy S3 became Samsung's most successful phone to that point. Then XDA developers found something that should not have existed. A kernel node called /dev/Exynos-mem provided direct read and write access to the device's entire physical memory. Any installed application could silently gain root-level permissions. No complex attack required. Just a door, left wide open, baked into the chip itself. The security hole wasn't in the software. It was in the silicon. Emergency patches went out across the Galaxy S3 and Note 2 fleet. The vulnerability was closed. But the question it raised about how thoroughly Samsung audited its own silicon would resurface repeatedly in the years ahead. 3 chips, 3 market wins, 3 things Samsung quietly fixed after shipping. The foundation was strong. The cracks were already visible. Exynos 5 Octa, 5410 in 2013, Samsung announced something that sounded extraordinary: 8 cores in a phone. The Exynos 5 Octa was the world's first big dot little octa-core mobile chip. 4 high-performance Cortex-A15 cores, 4 efficient Cortex-A7 cores. In theory, a masterpiece of heterogeneous computing. In practice, the chip's CCI 400 interconnect was, in the words of forensic analysts, inherently crippled in silicon. It couldn't mix cores from both clusters. It couldn't transition individual cores. The only operation available was switching the entire AA15 group on, or the entire A7 group on. 2 clusters of 4, trading shifts, not 8 cores working together. Samsung launched an 8-core chip that couldn't use 8 cores, and they knew before it shipped. There's one more detail worth knowing. Samsung had originally planned to pair the 5410 with a Mali T604 GPU. When thermal testing showed the Mali T604 combination pulling far more power than the design could handle, they switched to the PowerVir SGX 544 MP3, just months before the S4 launch. Crisis management, not design intent. Battery life sat at 12 hours. The Snapdragon 600 managed 15. The 8-core era had begun. With 4 usable cores and a GPU nobody planned for. Exynos 5433. A year later, something genuinely historic. The Exynos 5433 inside the Galaxy Note 4 was the first mobile chip with ARM v8 64-bit architecture. Cortex-A57 and A53 cores on 20 nanometer. Mali T760 and P6 GPU. Geekbench 3 multi-core. 4208 versus the Snapdragon 805's 3332. It was also the first mobile chip capable of hardware-decoded 4K 10-bit HEVC video, a full year before any competitor. This chip was ahead of its time. Samsung just wouldn't let it prove that. Because the Snapdragon 805 Note 4 was 32-bit only, Samsung locked the 5433 in 32-bit mode, killing its primary advantage. The 4K HEVC capability was disabled for the same reason. 2 chips into this era, both held back below their own ceiling. The question was whether this was strategic caution or whether under-delivering was becoming a habit. What came next answered that definitively. For 1 year, 1 chip, Samsung lifted every restriction, and the result was the most dominant mobile processor ever built. Exynos 7421 chip. 1 year, nothing close. The Exynos 7420, inside the Galaxy S6, was the world's first mobile processor on a 14-nanometer FinFET process, Samsung's own foundry, Samsung's own node, 4 Cortex-A57 performance cores, 4 Cortex-A53 efficiency cores, Mali T760 MP8 GPU, and 225, 68,913, versus the Snapdragon 810's 53,296. GFX bench. T-Rex 52.7 frames per second versus 38.8. And 35% better energy efficiency across every workload category. Qualcomm didn't just lose this year, they handed Samsung the crown. The Snapdragon 810, built on TSMC's 20-nanometer node, overheated catastrophically under sustained load. For the main Galaxy S6 lineup, for the first time, Samsung dropped Qualcomm entirely. No Snapdragon variants. Their chip, their rules. But the 7420's most underappreciated achievement was storage. The world's first mobile UFS 2.0 controller, delivering 25 gigabytes per second, double what the Snapdragon 810 managed. App launches felt instant in a way Android had never delivered before. This was the 1 year Exynos wasn't competing with Snapdragon. It was embarrassing it. Samsung's response was to reach further than their engineering could safely support. They decided to build their own CPU cores. From scratch. Exynos 8890. Apple had been doing it for years, designing custom CPU cores instead of using ARM's reference designs, compounding performance advantages year after year. In 2016, Samsung decided to try it themselves. The result was the M1 Mongoose core and the Exynos 8890. Built on refined 14-nanometer LPP, the 8890 paired 4 custom M1 cores with 4 Cortex-A53 efficiency cores, Geekbench 4 single-core, 1860 versus the Snapdragon 820's 1600, multi-core 5,583 versus 4,000. In CPU tasks, Qualcomm wasn't close. The CPU was winning. The GPU had a different opinion. The Mali T880 MP12 lost 27% of its performance after just 5 benchmark runs. The Snapdragon 820's Adreno 530 held far more consistently. For productivity, Exynos. For sustained gaming, Snapdragon. The chip's personality was split in half. One clean victory, the world's first integrated LTE Cat12 modem, supporting 600 megabits per second downlink, faster than Qualcomm's own solution that year. One crack in the GPU armor that would widen with every generation, Exynos 8895. Then came the Galaxy S8, and honestly, the Exynos 8895 was genuinely impressive. It moved to 10 nanometer LPE. The M2 core pushed performance further, and the Mali G71 MP20 brought 20 GPU cores, the largest cluster count in any mobile chip at that time. Geekbench 4 single-core, 1,978 against the Snapdragon 835's 1,929. Near identical. Samsung also introduced the Samsung Coherent Interconnect, enabling cache coherency between CPU and GPU, a foundational step toward the heterogeneous computing that would later define AI chip design. But Samsung built something no phone had ever done, then switched it off. The 8895 was hardware capable of recording 4K video at 120 frames per second. The Snapdragon 835 could not. Samsung disabled the feature anyway, to maintain parity across regional variants. Exynos S8 buyers had a chip that could shoot 4K at 120 frames per second. They just never knew it existed. Exynos 9810. In 2018, the M3 Mongoose core did something remarkable. Geekbench 4 single-core, 3740. The Snapdragon 845 managed 2450, a 53% lead. On paper, the fastest mobile chip on Earth. The benchmarks were extraordinary. The actual chip was something else entirely. Analysis by AnandTech revealed the M3 reached 2.7 GHz in single-threaded benchmarks, the exact scenario those scores measured. In real multi-core applications, it operated at 1.8 GHz, a figure Samsung never disclosed publicly. One M3 core at full speed pulled 3.5 watts. That's the thermal equivalent of a small light bulb running in the palm of your hand. After 20 minutes of sustained load, performance dropped to 60% of its opening output. A scheduler bug kept cores in low-power states too long, causing stutters even during light use. The M3 was a benchmark champion. In real hands, doing real things, it was a liability. Exynos 9820. So what do you do when your chip collapses under real-world pressure? If you're Samsung in 2019, you add more layers. The Exynos 9820 inside the Galaxy S10 introduced a tri-cluster setup, 2 M4 Mongoose cores, 2 Cortex-A75 cores, 4 Cortex-A55 cores. It also introduced the first dedicated NPU in an Exynos Flagship, handling real-time AI tasks like semantic segmentation in the camera pipeline. Samsung added AI, but they were losing the battle no AI could fix, the Foundry War. The 9820 ran on Samsung's 8nm node. The Snapdragon 855 ran on TSMC's 7nm. 1 nanometer sounds like nothing, but that gap translated directly into better efficiency, better density, and better sustained performance. The Mali G76 MP12 showed visible stuttering in demanding titles compared to the Adreno 640. The NPU was forward-looking. The process node was a present-tense problem, and the next chip would prove that designing around a gap isn't the same as closing it. Exynos 990. This is the one that broke things. The Exynos 990, inside the Galaxy S20, ran on Samsung's 7nm EUV node, the company's first use of extreme ultraviolet lithography in a flagship. The M5 Mongoose core was supposed to vindicate 5 years of custom silicon investment. Instead, it became the worst flagship chip Samsung had ever shipped. The 990's mid-cores operated at only 66% the efficiency of the Snapdragon 865's equivalent cores. In extended gaming, PUBG Mobile, the 990 throttled to 15 frames per second after an hour. The Snapdragon 865 held steady throughout. 50,000 people didn't just complain about a chip, they demanded Samsung stop making it. A Change.org petition gathered over 49,000 signatures. UK consumers paid approximately $1,115 for a Galaxy S20 with the 990. US buyers paid $899 for the Snapdragon variant. Same phone, different chip. The Exynos tax had a name, a number, and a petition. The worst part wasn't the performance. It was the price. UK buyers paid more for less. Exynos 2100. The Exynos 2100 showed up without any of the things Samsung had spent 5 years betting on. No Mongoose, no custom cores, no architectural ego, just competitiveness, which, after everything, was exactly what was needed. Built on Samsung's 5nm LPE node, the 2100 used ARM's new Cortex-X1 as its prime core, supported by 3 Cortex-A78 performance cores and 4 Cortex-A55 efficiency cores, the same ARM designs Qualcomm used in the Snapdragon 888. Different foundry, different result. Abandoning your own custom core after 5 years isn't failure. Sometimes it's the smartest move in the room. In idle and light load battery efficiency, the 2100 actually outperformed the Snapdragon 888. Under sustained load, it still throttled sooner, 27 minutes versus 38, but the gap was no longer humiliating. And quietly, the 2100 supported AV1 hardware video decoding. The codec Netflix and YouTube were rapidly adopting, something the US Snapdragon 888 simply couldn't do. The 2100 wasn't perfect. It was honest, and after 5 years of Mongoose, honest was exactly what the Exynos brand needed. Exynos 2200 brought something genuinely new. Samsung partnered with AMD, bringing RDNA, 2 graphics architecture to mobile, the same GPU technology inside PlayStation 5. Miniaturized for a smartphone, the Exynos 2200, built on 4nm LPE, launched with the Xclipse 920 GPU, hardware ray tracing on Android, a graphics capability no mobile chip had offered before. Then the scandal arrived. Samsung didn't just throttle a chip, they built a list of 10,000 apps and quietly made them slower. The Game Optimization Service, GOS, restricted performance to 53.9% of advertised capability across over 10,000 applications. Benchmarks ran at full speed. Everything else was artificially capped. Users were paying for performance they never received. Here's the catch. The chip itself was capable. Samsung chose not to cool it properly. The vapor chamber had been physically removed from the Galaxy S22 to cut costs. GOS was the software replacement. The hardware solution was gone. The software solution was deception. Geekbench delisted Samsung Galaxy S22 devices, the first major manufacturer removed for benchmark manipulation. Samsung issued a public apology. Consumer trust wasn't so easily patched. Exynos 2300. The Galaxy S23 launched with 0 Exynos chips. Every variant, every market, every unit. Snapdragon. Samsung's phone didn't trust Samsung's chip. For the first time ever, the Exynos 2300, codenamed Quadra, was cancelled before mass production. Internal evidence suggests it was actually competitive, matching the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in multi-core benchmarks. The cancellation wasn't purely technical, it was a trust failure. The mobile division had lost confidence in the chip division's ability to deliver without another public scandal. The 2300 became the casualty of a corporate civil war now visible from the outside, but its architecture didn't disappear. Google adopted the 2300's design as the foundation for the Tensor G3 inside the Pixel 8. The 2300 never shipped in a Galaxy, but it's inside a Pixel right now. A scandal, a cancellation, an entire generation handed to Qualcomm. The only path forward was a gamble on technology nobody had fully mastered. Samsung went all in. Exynos 2400. The Exynos 2400, inside the Galaxy S24 in select markets, was Samsung's statement that the chip division was still alive. 10 cores, a configuration Samsung had never attempted. 1 Cortex-X4 prime core, 3 Cortex-A720 performance cores, 2 mid-tier A720 cores, and 4 Cortex-A520 efficiency cores, made possible by FOWLP packaging, which improved thermal management by 15%. The GPU, Xclipse 940 AMD RDNA 3 actually delivered. In ray tracing workloads, it challenged and in some scenarios beat the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3's Adreno 750 Geekbench 6 single-core, approximately 2036. Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, approximately 2042. The gap didn't just close. For one benchmark, it disappeared entirely. The 2400 was the first Exynos since the 7420 that didn't require an apology. That by itself meant something. Exynos 2500. Samsung's next step was technically historic. Commercially, it nearly didn't happen. The Exynos 2500 was the first 3nm gate-all-around chip. GAA surrounds the transistor on all four sides. Better control, better efficiency, smaller size. The kind of leap that only happens once a decade. It carried a Cortex-X 925 prime core at 3.3 GHz, a 59 TOPS AI NPU, and the Xclipse 950 GPU. It also carried an integrated NTN modem, emergency SOS messaging via satellite, without any cellular coverage. Samsung built the world's most advanced 3nm chip, then couldn't make enough of them to put in their own phone. Yield rates sat as low as 20% during mid-2024 production. 4 defective chips for every one that worked. The Galaxy S25 launched as 100% Snapdragon globally. For the second consecutive generation, Samsung's phone had rejected Samsung's chip. Exynos 2600. Everything Samsung has built, lost, rebuilt, and nearly lost again leads here. The Exynos 2600, codenamed Thetis, is the world's first commercial 2nm mobile processor, built on Samsung's SF2 gate-all-around node, and it is the most radical departure in the series' 16-year history. It throws out big dot little completely. 10 performance cores, 1C, 1 Ultra at the top, 9C, 1 Pro underneath, all built for real workloads. A 39% CPU, IPC improvement over the 2500. Early Geekbench 6 multi-core data puts it at approximately 11,621, which would edge the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5's 11,515. The GPU, Xclipse 960, AMD's Juno architecture, delivers a reported 50% improvement in ray tracing over the previous generation.